Good morning or good afternoon, art historians. And I'd like to welcome you back to the AP Art History Review. This is John Gunnan talking from the West Coast, California, broadcasting live. And of course, all of our reviews are held on YouTube, so you can watch them later on. And I just want to say that this is our last week of formal review, and then we have a week of test prep. So we have 2 more weeks for you to get ready for the AP test. And I'm getting very excited about this test. I hope you are. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to show off your skills. And especially since so much has been canceled this year, it's a great thing that you can do. So I'm going to my screen, and the first thing you see, hopefully you remember from another review, and that would be examples of neoclassical architecture in the United States of America. On the left, the Virginia Capitol; on the right, the Supreme Court, a style that gets repeated over and over again. I know that close by my house, we have a bank that looks like this. So institutions that want to have a certain clout do this. Well, why do bureaucracies, government, why did they glom onto this thing that really came from temples, more of a religious thing when they started? And it really is associated with the idea of democracy starting out in ancient Greece in such a fragile thing, really, when it started out, and such a delicate thing that was vulnerable, really, as a form of government. So today we will be reviewing some sacred spaces. Now, if you think back over these reviews, we've had a whole session on Christian churches. We've had a session that covered mosques. So today we're going to do some of the temples from ancient Greece, and then we're going to go compare to the Aztec temple. Okay. So if you go from this as a view from an airplane or something, I want you to go and look down into Athens and find the sacred hilltop that is the Acropolis. And remember that most Greek city-states, cities had that high point that could serve as a fortress and defend the city, and could be a place for the sacred buildings as well. Okay, so here are the layout of the most important buildings in the Acropolis in Athens. And remember that this hill had a long, long history. Lots of things were built there. There was remodeling, and then over time, things were damaged quite badly, such as the Parthenon. It was even kind of blown up by a ship at one point, blew the roof off of it. So we're really looking at things that are fragmentary in many cases. So to develop a little context, we know that Greeks entered this golden age, but this really is a period of 10 years or so of wars, kind of a back and forth battle marathon, where this small city state of Athens really is able to defeat this mighty empire of Persia. And if we think back, I know we've seen some Persian things from our set in a previous review, but I just want to remind you of the breadth and power of this empire, and the scope and the influence. Really amazing. And of course, just the size of this audience hall in Persepolis is stunning. And then you see on the reliefs there of people from different parts of the empire coming in with tribute. And it was a very multicultural empire as well. And so we will go back and see that later. So building up to the end of this conflict of Greeks and Persians, Battle of Thermopylae, the battle that Persians won, but at a high cost. The Battle of Salamis, a naval battle where Greeks were able to lure the Persian navy into a small straits, and then flip around and ambush them. A very interesting strategic battle. And then along here you see the Persians were yeah, actually invaded Athens. Many citizens fled the city, and the whole Acropolis, as it was sacked. And of course, to the Greeks, this was kind of not playing by the rules, because when the Greeks conquered someone, they generally would not sack their religious buildings. So anyway, and then to wind up the idea of finally the Greeks in the last land battle defeat for once and for all the Persian forces, and they are able to have this a new sense of power and domination over the Mediterranean. So we can see there where I put that little square out there. I'll show you with my pointer if I can find it. Right here is the location of the island of Delos, and that was kind of the sense of states all chipping in money together to make this Delian League to help defend the new Greek states. And you could see there that over on the right side of which is now Turkey, all of that territory was beginning to be reclaimed at this point for the Greek states. So here is someone we can really associate with patronage when it comes to the Parthenon and the Acropolis. It's Pericles, a talented statesman, a talented politician, someone who really led Greek through this golden age. And we've seen a lot of golden ages in the art history class. You know, Spain, southern Spain in the 800s, the Italian Renaissance, the Dutch Baroque period. Many times we know that they are associated with money, with prosperity. And of course, in 483, Athens discovered this huge vein of silver that made them very rich. And you could see that Pericles led for a long time. And I did want to mention, because of the coronavirus, that in 429, 430, they were hit with a plague. And this often is something that intervenes in history different times. I did want to show, hopefully you can identify this image because it is in your set. And I'm not sure we've talked about it yet, but it is the School of Athens by Raphael, and it's in the Vatican. You knew that, right? Okay, so this is a kind of a discussion, a bringing together of all the Greek philosophers, thinkers, mathematicians, that honors the golden age of Greece that Pericles was a part of. Now, I was searching this because you can find a key online to who all the people were, and I did find Euclid and Pythagoras, but I did not find Pericles, so I don't think he's in the School of Athens. Okay, so let's look in at the specific buildings. There you can see a nice example on the left of how perhaps it looked when it was in use. When it was first created, they were brightly painted. It's always surprising to a lot of people. And then you see the name Phidias. Phidias was the sculptor that was in charge of the general program. So he designed the sculptural program, and I'm not saying that every sculpture was sculpted out by Phidias. He, I'm sure, had a large team of people working for him. Okay, so here is another view with some of the main buildings, and in red I have put down the buildings that are in your image set, because those will be the buildings that are most likely to come up for you on the AP test. There you can see a layout, and they had some sense of celestial, lining up with the sun. I believe it's something we see over and over again. These are the exact images, by the way, from your CED. So we'll see part of a pediment, part of a frieze. So we'll talk about first the Parthenon. Ictinos and Calycrates. Ictinos was sort of the designer, like the architect. Calycrates was sort of like a general contractor who could carry out the task. So they worked as a team. Parthenon Athena Parthos, Virgin Athena, a monument to the patron god of Athens. Okay, and you can see it starts just after 450, 447. This was, of course, a very prosperous time. Even so, Pericles had trouble convincing the other leaders to spend money on this. There was really a lot of money that went in. So this, well, on the left you see a recreation. On the right you see the place where this metope would have been, and of course these have been stripped away, and many of them are in Britain. But that rectangular shape is called a metope. Okay, this is the amount of money they spent in the terms of today's dollars on this. The Parthenon is a perfection of a temple type. And I put the one on the left, it's an older Greek temple from the Archaic period. And you can see it just doesn't have the spring in its step that the Parthenon has. They redid this design. There's a lot of subtleties in the design of the Parthenon. So it really is a perfect building. It's perfected this style. So if I can get my pointer up here, I'm just going to go and talk about a couple of mathematical illusions that I enjoy. That supposedly there's no straight lines in the Parthenon. So if you follow my pointer, I'm doing my best here on a laptop, that line is a bowed line. So in other words, if I use my hands, that it's not straight across, it's got this slight bow to it to compensate for how your eye would see it. And because if it was straight, the building would have a tendency to look sagging. And so the Greeks knew, and of course, all of these mathematical things are subtle. Another one is if you took the line of the columns and you followed it up into the air, they'd all eventually meet like a mile up or something. So they're slightly slanted in. It's very interesting, all of the different things. Now, there's a plan of the Acropolis, and you could see that there's different programs. You see the word maki come up a lot, you know, like Gigantakami, and that is a war, basically. So there's scenes of war on the outside, but on the inside where you have the frieze, something different. Okay, there's 3 places on a Greek temple where you can find sculpture: the pediment, the metope, and the frieze. Okay, and we'll get these straight. By the way, that's the Parthenon in Tennessee. There's a recreation of it. I know that when I was a little kid, my dad took me there on a road trip once to see it. Little did I know I'd be talking to you about it years later. But although I haven't been there in many years, it's a pretty faithful recreation from what I understand. So here are those different places, different types of relief sculpture that you'll find associated with Greek temples and the Parthenon. And of course, the pediment is the triangular one. Metope is a singular rectangle, and frieze is continuous. So in my class, we would always say metope, 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 frieze, because frieze continues. Okay, so that's how we remember it. So going to the pediment, this is the nice example of, although it's fragmentary, of what's going on. And I believe this is the moment of Athena's birth. And so I was going to ask you to look at this and say, well, we learned a lot about classical a few weeks back, and we know that really kind of the poster child for classical style would be the spear bearer. So I was going to ask you to look at this and say, well, any reasons you could categorize this as classical. And maybe it's best to look at the a figure of the man who we think is Dionysus or Heracles, one of the two. Okay, what reasons would you give? Okay, you could say monumentality and idealization, musculature, the male nude, all of those kinds of things. Now, we are looking at Greek sculptures that are in the British Museum. And of course, there's a big story behind this that involves colonialism and the taking of them away. At the museum in Athens, they're waiting for the return of many of the artifacts that are in the British Museum. And of course, there's a wonderful science about care and cleaning and restoration, but unfortunately, they didn't know how to do it in 1937, and they scrubbed down the marbles, and I think they really abraded them. So, to the point where the people today would be horrified at because they lost a little bit of the surface, and the goal of this was to make them very white. Well, they didn't really know or remember that they had originally been painted in their time. So for us today, it's very interesting if there's ever a little bit of a fragmentary paint left over, because of course that can be studied and we can learn a lot. So don't scrub your sculptures with an abrasive material is my recommendation going forward here. I just show these. They're not in your CED, but they're incredibly great example of that wet drapery technique that we will see on the Nike sculpture. And also, this is a modern day recreation because this statue is gone. It's not in existence. It is the cult statue, though, and remember that Greek temples always did have a cult statue in the middle of the temple. And this statue also is famous. Well, not only is it huge, but it's famous for having a lot of gold and silver, and the wealth that was laid into this building was incredible. It's almost like a treasury. But remember, with precious metals like gold and things like that, whatever form they're in, can be melted down. So having a gold a gilded statue like that would be a way of almost holding money, like a bank almost. Okay, so here are some different fragments of the interior frieze. This is what that statue of Athena will be looking at. And the part that you can find it there where you see the frieze, the Pan-Athenaic procession. However, this theme, the Pan-Athenaic procession, has been called into question about if that's really what this frieze is about. I know that was sort of what people thought for a long time, but there's some new theories out about what this frieze might really be. I have some very nice pictures of this. These are the Ergastines, who were the weavers of the Peplos. So in the procession, it's a city festival every 4 years, I believe, where the whole population of Athens would go to the temple with a giant Peplos, which is, of course, that garment that we saw a while back, and drape the statue with the garment. But it's a lot of ritual involved. Also a lot of sacrificing of cows and subsequent barbecuing. Okay, these are some really nice details that give you the feeling of different depths of relief. And then I just wanted to bring back the Persepolis reliefs for contrast, because that's a nice comparison. They're much more stylized. And then I did want to mention, you'll hear, if you study the Acropolis, you'll hear references to King Erechtheus and daughters. It's a legendary king of Athens. And I always say, you know, with history kind of mutates into legend, which mutates into myth, depending on how far back you go. And King Erechtheus was this mythical king. And there's some question now about whether or not this picture from the Parthenon frieze is refers to the sacrifice of the daughters of King Erechtheus, because you can see the child on the right is disrobing as if they're going to put on a funerary shroud for their sacrifice. And that involves a founding myth of Athens. But in our archaeological investigations, there's really not evidence that the Greeks were sacrificing people. So I think we have to think about it metaphorically in terms of even today's democracy. You know, democratic societies have a sense of sacrifice. When you think of how the military, people serve in the military, people pay taxes. There's a lot of you know, sacrificing. So perhaps it's a metaphorical sacrifice. So it's always good to, there's so much to know about this building, but it's always good to know that you know, on a day, a festival day, that the altar would not be inside the building. It would be in front of the building and on the steps, or in front of the steps of the building. And that was where a cow or a bull could be sacrificed to, in this case, the goddess Athena. But remember that the Greeks didn't just destroy an animal. Of course, they ate the animal. It's like United States on the 4th of July, people are barbecuing. So it was a sense of community and sharing that sustenance. And then they would take the parts of the animal that were not really edible, like the bones and the hair, and throw that into the fire. And the smell of the burning parts pleased the gods. So everyone was happy. Okay. There's a couple of other buildings, although the Erechtheion is not part of the set. I wanted to call into your attention the Caryatids, because we have something very similar in the set. On the left, Alawe of Ise, from, I know that you reviewed this sooner or later, or I think about a week ago, we've seen it. And then I did want to mention that the ones in the middle are not the real ones. They're copies. And I wondered if you could tell the copy from the real one on the right. I can't tell, but the sun and the air pollution made these sculptures vulnerable. And of course, they've been moved away to protect them. Okay, now the last little temple of the Acropolis, a temple of Athena Nike, was done a little bit later. It's perched right on the edge of the Acropolis. Right as you walk in, you kind of look up at it to your right. And the temple is facing out at the Bay of Salamis, where the naval victory occurred. Okay, this temple is a different style than what we've seen. But I am looking, I notice up at the top there's a frieze, and you'll notice the Ionic capitals on the columns. So this is really done in a slightly different style, okay? And this style has, the Anthropos style has the columns, 4 columns in front and back. And there you have the plan. We've seen this before, and it's a great example of the wet drapery technique. It's very beautiful, and I think it's really it shows some progression from the Parthenon frieze in terms of, I think, its sensuality. And as you move into the 300s with Greek sculpture, it does start to become very sensuous and beautiful in the time before it changes over to the Hellenistic style. And of course, go back and you remember there the archaic style. And what is she wearing? A peplos, right? Okay, so here would be some questions I would recommend that you answer just to review what we've just covered. And but why don't you take a picture with your cell phone and see if you can come back to this later on, because I'd like to use our time well today, and I'd like to review another classical building from the Roman Empire in this case, and that would be the Pantheon. And this building, by the way, I just showed the Virginia Capitol a moment ago. This building was a model for the Library Rotunda at the University of Virginia. Okay, I hope I'm not treading on Miss Napier's territory too much here, because she's from Virginia, and here I am talking about it way out on the West Coast. Now, this building is not on a hilltop, a sacred hilltop. It's plunked right down in the middle of the city. I love this artist's rendition of it back in the old days. So there is your identifying information. Remember that when you identify something on the test, you're going to say two things, okay? And this also is a screenshot of what you get in your image set. And now I just want to remind you, although I'm very, I get pictures from all over the place, and I think your teacher also shows lots and lots of pictures of monuments, but if you're going to be tested on it, they're going to give you the same exact image that is on the in the course and exam description. They're not going to switch out the image and expect you to know it from a different angle. Okay, so the Pantheon also has a complex history. Although it says on the front of it that Marcus Agrippa made it, it's really associated with the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, probably begun under Trajan and completed under Hadrian. These emperors were associated with the high empire of Rome. They were generally powerful and quite ambitious and successful emperors. And there's some interesting things here in terms of vocabulary. Right down at the bottom there, I show you the oculus is the space that lets in light. It's quite large. I think it's over 30 feet long. The coffers are the design element in the dome from the inside that also not only serve as a visual a way to accentuate the dome, but they actually kind of hollow out spaces to make the dome lighter. And right there where I say travertine to pumice, what I mean to remind people is that concrete has ground stone blended in with it. So I'm going to take my pointer out here. So down in the lower part of the dome, you'd use a heavier stone like travertine, but way up to the top of the dome, you could make concrete with a lighter stone such as pumice. Okay, and then of course the niches are the area for statues of the gods. Here's a very nice cutaway image diagram. I'm really enthusiastic about cutaway images. They really show you a lot, so look for those. I always like to tell the story of, the Lutherans sacked Rome in the 1520s, and they didn't do anything to the Pantheon. They walked in and it stopped them in their tracks. Happily for all of us. So there's two circles at play here. One that goes like this and one the other way. So this building also has its geometry. And of course, really started off the idea of the dome, which we've seen in the Hagia Sophia and many other buildings. Okay, and then the final idea here with the Pantheon is that although Pantheon means all the gods, it's really, I think, contested about how this building was used and really were a lot of gods, all the Roman gods in there? Was it a move? Was the idea of monotheism at play, or was it a nod to the plurality of Rome citizens? Remember that in Athens, everyone basically believed in the same gods, but Rome was made up of a matrix of people that had all kinds of different beliefs. As long as you were respectful of Rome, they really kind of allowed that. So another of the thing would be to think about the sites. Okay, on the left, on the Pantheon is plunked down in the middle of the city, in the city streets, versus the top of the hill, which would be the thing that you would command your view from wherever you were in the city. So sites is always a good thing to talk about when you compare architecture. And of course, one of the things that's nice here is we have on screen together two wonderful, incredible buildings that both start with a P. Please don't mix them up. Parthenon and Pantheon. Now, to conclude the day, I want to go back and talk about the Aztec Temple, because I think that if you do a comparison on your AP test with sacred spaces, you would be most likely to have a multicultural, a cross-cultural comparison. So we really like to do that. On the upper left, you can see the excavation site today, and then on the lower left, an artist's rendition of really what was going on here. And let's see, there's a kind of a complex map showing all of the different groups that was in that were in Mexico. And I think I have another map that's a little simpler that I'd like to show in a minute. This is the Causeway. Remember that a lot of this land in the lake was reclaimed, and they were really wizards at water and manipulating, draining, and reclaiming land, and then using water. It was really amazing. And of course, this was the causeway that Cortez had to approach and then flee on when the battles broke out between Cortez and the Aztecs. We know that we also see this picture from very far away in the Velasco painting, the Valley of Mexico. There's the map I want. That's a little bit simpler. Okay. Now you could say Mexica or Aztec. I think we have them by both. But this is basically a good picture of where they were, and you could see them expanding down into Central America. The Maya, let's remember, were much earlier. Okay, and there on the bottom, another nice recreation of the sort of pyramid with the two temples on top. And on top, I love this picture. It's not a great quality picture, but I love it because you see this moment, and you know that that moment has to be on the equinox, okay? Because that's the day the sun lines up like that. And that shows the change in seasons. Remember that down in Mexico, you have only two seasons, rainy season and dry season. Very important. This is a very bloody story about people being sacrificed. With the Parthenon, we talked about the idea of sacrifice, kind of a legend, but we don't really have evidence that that was really happening. Here we do. Okay, so on top of the temple, you have the calendar stone, that's on the right. And then on the bottom of the temple, you have the Shocky Stone, that's on the bottom right. Okay, now hopefully this rather gory picture of the sacrificing going on, but hopefully you can tell that this picture came from a document that you've studied, an artwork you've studied, and that would be the Codex Mendoza. Now, on the top of the pyramid, there's two temples. They are associated with these two gods, Tlaloc, I love saying that. Tlaloc, say that right now, wherever you are. And then Huitzilopochtli, okay, the god of war and sun. It's easy to keep Tlaloc straight because of rain, but the other one is a rather complex god of war, sun, and human sacrifice, because this idea of sacrifice was that the gods Huitzilopochtli needed this sacrifices to keep everything going like it's going. Well, calendar stone, and the middle, the mouth, there could be a knife, sacrificial knife set into that slot where the mouth is. Sometimes with these relief works, you can find these black and white drawings of them that help you see it a lot better. I know with the Peruvian, some of the Peruvian stelas, that's really true. It's nice to look at them like that. So there's a lot of iconography on here, and I don't think you're going to get down to that level. I think that's PhD level of iconography for this. If you write an essay, remember that your time will be limited. In there you can see that this has a lot of thickness to the stone as well. There was, though, the calendar associated with this, and you know, the Maya also had a calendar. So it's interesting how all these different cultures came up with variations of the calendar. And I put there just to remind you that they had nameless days. I wonder if that's something like a leap year, which we had this year, right? February 29th. Now we're going to wind up here and look at the Shocky Stone. And this was a myth about plotting against the mother and siblings. And not, just like the Greeks, God's behaving badly, I think. So here is a drawing. It helps you to see it a little bit. Dismembered figure of Shocky, and then there a colored one to see it even better. And then finally, a nice example made on a sugar cookie from the students at Sage Hill School. Thank you. And a little view of their pretzel and candy version of the temple. I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, we are going to look back and review a little bit from the last session with Allison Napier. The work shown is the Aztec ruler's headdress. Its materials communicate specific cultural meaning that signifies power and authority of the ruler. Okay, so these stones, and by the way, let me get to the rest of the question. I had to break this up. So select and completely identify a second work that communicates political power and authority, or power and authority through materials. So I'm going to choose for my second work the Inca Tunic. And in order to fully identify it, I will say that it is made from the fibers of both animals and plants, the dyed fibers, okay, and worn by the king. Now I'm going to redo that idea. We have the one work on the Aztec work is the Quetzali feathers, which were connecting to an auspicious animal that was related to, you know, the power of birds and flight and the gods. And then, of course, the materials of the Inca, on the tunic, were produced in a very controlled environment by these special women who were weavers of the work. The significance of the materials, I think I'm repeating a little bit, but I'm saying, you know, the bird, the Quetzali bird was a related to gods, was auspicious. The Inca one is a little different. The bird feathers are rare and they're a little more coveted. On the Inca work, the tucapus, which are the little emblems of all of the different facets of the empire, such as the military groups, different groups, and all coming together. And so the the Inca work has a sense of prestige. I think the similarity coming down to the end here is that only the chief can wear these works. If you wear a work with every tucapu, you are the guy in charge of it all. If you are the guy with the feather headdress, only the chief. And of course, the difference of the works would be one work has a specific iconography versus just the metaphor of the feathers themselves, okay? So hopefully you had some of those points in yours. So this is my homework practice for today, and we've already talked a lot about it. I think our job is just to put it back together here. I'm sorry, I missed a D there at associated. So what I'd like you to do is take a picture of this with your camera phone and then come back later on today and see if you can either write it out or make a little chart about it. And if you make a chart with bullet points, I want to remind you, do not use bullet points on the AP test. Even though it helps us to think that way, you can always do it off to the side, but don't, you want to write your AP test out, okay? All right, this is John Gunnan from California. I'm really enjoying, and we have a couple more coming up for you. Get ready for that AP test. Until next time.